Hello, I'm Karen Mayada-Allman, and I'm one of the events co-coordinators at the Elliott Bay Book Company in Seattle, Washington. Thank you so much for joining us today for this program, where we'll be talking about the Armenian diaspora. We'll be addressing the current world situation, and we'll also be hearing some wonderful poetry and seeing a little film. So we're zooming today from the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people, and we encourage you to find out more about and also to support the programs, both the Duwamish and also of the Lushootseed Language and Cultural Center. And I have put some information about the center and the programs in our chat today. But today's program is with Peter Balakian and Atom Egoyan. And we're here to celebrate the publication of Peter Balakian's book, No Sign, which was recently published by the University of Chicago Press. Peter is the author of 8 books of poems, 4 books of prose, 3 collaborative translations, and several edited books. We have had the pleasure of hosting Mr. Balakian at least 2 other times at our bookstore live. We had hoped that we would be able to host him today also in person, but many of you might not have been able to join, and certainly Atom Egoyan would not have been. So the silver lining tonight is that you are all with us. Peter's also the author of the book Ozone Journal, which won the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, Black Dog of Fate, a memoir which won the 1998 Penn Martha Armbrand Prize for the Art of Memoir and was the best book of the year for the New York Times, the LA Times and Publishers Weekly, The Burning Tigress, the Armenian Genocide and America's Response. And this book won the 2005 Raphael Lemkin Prize and was a New York Times notable book and a bestseller. His translation of Girgoris Balakian's Armenian Golgotha, a memoir of the Armenian Genocide, was a Washington Post Book of the Year, and he is Donald M. and Constance H. Rebar Professor of the Humanities, Professor of English, and Director of Creative Writing at Colgate University. And he is zooming in from near Colgate in upstate New York today. Also joining us for today's program is Atom Egoyan, and he has 18 feature films, and he's also won numerous awards for these films, including 5 prizes at the Cannes Film Festival and also 2 Academy Award nominations. His body of work, which includes theater, music, and art installation, delves into issues of memory, displacement, and the impact of technology and media on modern life. Egoyan directed a virtual presentation of Bartók's Bluebird's Castle for Canadian Opera Company in March of 2022. And he is zooming in from Toronto today, though I've just found out that he actually grew up in Victoria, British Columbia. And so welcome back to the Northwest. Thank you very much to you, and thanks for everyone for joining us. I'm going to send it to Peter, who will start with some poetry, and then we will have some conversation.
Karen, thank you greatly for hosting, for organizing. It's been great to be at Elliott Bay in the past. It's great to be here now by Zoom. And I have to say, Elliott Bay is one of the great bookstores in America. I'm not saying it because you're hosting me tonight, it is. And when I go to Seattle, I usually go to the Pike Place Market and Elliott Bay first, then the rest all happens. It's such a great pleasure to be in conversation with my friend Atom tonight. Our conversations over the years have been rich and wonderful and inspiring. His work has cut such a swath across the globe and across my head with so many extraordinary films. I think of him always as lyric inventor and epic seer. So Atom, thanks for being here tonight. And yeah, there's some good things about the pandemic era. We can chat on Zoom in a way we couldn't otherwise. I'm going to start tonight. I'm going to read about 4 poems, and then Atom's going to come in and we're going to have some conversation. And I will circle back to close with a few short poems, and then we open it up to conversation with the audience. And it looks like chat will be the way to do that. So I want to start I'm reading poems from this new book tonight as a kind of presentation of the book. And I want to start with a poem called Yellow Lilies. Well, we all live in the imagination. Artists have their own particular relationship to imagination, but we all live in the imagination. It is an essential part of what human beings do in order to make meaning and survive. This poem is called Yellow Lilies. Looking up, a galaxy is any star skidding into black. A black hole is my love. Who knows what's in the next cushion of air? What if a hole is just a Greek urn or Sarah's paint stick spiral? It's past midnight and specks of light are wings of giant birds. I'll hang my torn soul on that. Take the flash of a star, the white line of a plane. Hear the ocean sound of words, hum blaring horn of wind. When I wake in gray light, black rocks, cardinals, yellow lilies, cumulonimbus. The grass is drying on me. A deer's eyes burn through the pines. This poem started in real life in a telephone booth at an artist colony in the summer of 1986. This is Yaddo, the great artist colony in Saratoga Springs, New York. A colleague, friend of mine that summer, African-American poet named Dolores Kendrick, after a number of conversations we were having about our mutual hero, James Baldwin, said to me, hey, I talk to Jimmy every few days. He's dying of cancer in the south of France. Why don't you come into the phone booth and say something to him? And the idea, of course, terrified me. But as a couple of weeks went on, I thought, well, why not? So this poem begins there. And I think of it as a poem about strange dislocations and odd, strange intersections. My great uncle, who was arrested at the onset of the Armenian Genocide and spent 4 years in the killing fields. He was a priest and later a bishop. He was arrested with the 250 intellectuals at the beginning of the whole mass killing on April 24 of 1915. He was actually at the Paris Peace Treaty in 1919 when Armenians were hoping for a nation. History, bitterness. A phone booth, August, Yaddo, Saratoga Springs. Air of the Tiffany parlor, sour scent of empty wine bottles. My friend handed me the sweating receiver. Go ahead, say hello. What could I say to James Baldwin, who was dying in the south of France? No name in the street, Paris, Algiers, Little Rock, you can fill it in. I'm sitting at Les Deux Magots with my NY Yankees umbrella in my lap, a wide glass of wine from some vineyard of Burgundy in my hand, recalling that Baldwin sat here drinking scotch all day and writing as friends dropped by. And it hits me. Just over Pont de Soleil, my great uncle sat in a big treaty room in 1919, representing Armenia. Did it exist? In a fancy hotel with others who hoped for a nation in return for the slaughter. Baldwin knew Sartre and de Beauvoir. He saw Camus pass by. It was 1958, and the Algerian cabbie who dropped him off drunk on the curb was half blind from the revolution. Bang, bang, bang goes the heart. Mr. Baldwin was dying in a sensual village in the south of France. After a week at Versailles, my uncle came to that hotel room where in the closet of his head, a big white sheet floated over the Black Sea. What did rape and massacre mean? Fail-proof, shattered, bitten off words that floated over the bridge into the carnival horns of night. A few months earlier, Miles Davis passed Baldwin at Les Deux Magots on his way to play for Louis Malle's En Censure pour l'Échafaud. The spurting air of love, love, love slipping from the valves. The spit and breath of night in Paris off the torpid brown Seine where Paul Celan had disappeared not long before. Hiss, hiss, hiss goes the heart. It's 1958, and Camus still walks the boulevard. The war in Algeria is daily acid in the river. What are degrees of separation? Private myths, illusions. My aunt, the surrealist, might call them chance meetings. Do we invent proximities for our need, for salvation, for love? Wilson, Clemenceau, Lloyd George, names my uncle scrawled on a map of the dispossessed, on a wall in a hotel of cards where Dixieland horns played at the banquet for the Grande Armée, and the next map of Europe was shuffled with an ace in the hole. Miles Davis spent 7 hours with Louis Malle making some languid, piercing, hollow, sliding sounds in the indeterminate, dank night. No name on the street stalked him. A few years later, Baldwin moved just miles from where my father was born in Istanbul. A few years after the Armenians were expunged from Turkey and my grandparents left the ghost map on the wall. It was 1919, and the flu blew along Saint-Germain, where my grandparents met my uncle that fall. I knew Baldwin's heart went hollow, languid, and sizzled with the need to get out of America. It even led him to the place my grandparents fled before they landed a couple miles from Baldwin's apartment in Harlem. Are these degrees of separation, or just my way of thinking about that strange moment in a phone booth at an artist colony in the summer of '86? My friend said, if you love Jimmy's work, I know he'd love to hear from you. All good news means a lot, especially at the end. What could I say to Mr. Baldwin? He'd helped me understand the bitter history that had trapped me, that was trapped in me. Istanbul, New York, Paris, no name, no street. I was sweating into the phone. Mr. Baldwin's voice was frail, but unmistakable. This poem is entitled Outside Arshil Gorky's Studio, and it's dedicated to Atom Egoyan for many reasons. And there's much to say about Gorky and his extraordinary animating impact on the imaginations of many artists, writers, filmmakers, viewers of painting. And Gorky was a survivor of the Armenian Genocide, survived a death march from his home city in Van, north across the border to Yerevan in Transcaucasian Armenia then. And he did create a great painting of his mother with himself from a photograph taken of the two of them before the genocide in 1914. And we're going to look at a clip from Adam's film, They Will Take My Island. So I'm giving the cue to Holly or Karen to start the clip. Thanks. Outside our Girgoris studio, buying organic honey and a slab of blue at the open market, Union Square, late day. Look up to see that number 36 is covered over by a storefront selling high-tech stuff. And a light drizzle coats my head. And through the streetlights, I see a church down the block that jogs me to the big lake and the Armenian church your mother used to take you to. It's still in Turkey, where I took some cell phone snaps of the carved walls as the morning sun, like Phaeton's chariot, lit up the Madonna and Child on the east facade that you worked over so many times till your brush was down to nothing. The 29 crash, bread lines, bullet holes in glass doors. Why stretch canvases in the daylight of bad times? Your friend said you scrubbed your studio floor with Lysol till it blanched. Canvases raw, scraped, linen. Wasn't it Hegel who said beauty was an expression of some sort of freedom? All roads led to Union Square. Nightmares scoured by day, turpentine evaporating by night. I'm going to read the first four sections of the long poem in the middle of my book. The long poem has the same title as the book, No Sign, and it's the third long poem in a trilogy. And the first long poem came in my Ziggurat book, the second one, Ozone Journal, and this, No Sign. In this poem, multi-section, multi-sequence poem, an estranged couple meet up again after years on the cliffs of the Palisades in northern Jersey on the banks of the Hudson River. And that looks out at Manhattan and George Washington Bridge. And they have a conversation. This is a dialogical poem in which a conversation about the geologic history of the earth and the future of the earth the film Hiroshima Mon Amour, and the aftermath of the Vietnam War, among other things. Those three threads crisscross through their conversation that takes them to the places it takes them, and probes some of the realities of our time, our age, the nuclear age. No sign. One. He. Is it night already? She. No. He. Did our house fall down? She. What happened? He. Is it you? Two. He. Yes. She. Why should I believe you? He. Doesn't geology put us in our place? He. We appeared in the age of fission, vaporized bodies, ionized dragonflies, shadows printed on stone. She. Japanese cities burned in my dreams. I saw the newsreels in class decades later. He. We're back here on the Palisade Cliffs, staring at Manhattan. Remember when the Sauterne was liquid gold? Three. She. In the beginning, there were alpha particles and gamma rays. We always see daylight through the kitchen window near dusk. We can't forget how dusk turns the hydrangea deep blue. We can't forget the glowing dioxin sun, the no gaze, morning bright blue Agent Orange sky, even now, after all. Four. He. Godard called Hiroshima Mon Amour Faulkner plus Stravinsky. She. Remember, at the Angelica, September smell of light rain, warm sidewalks, shop awnings, late summer. He. The Norend curtains opened, the Norend curtains closed. We stared at kanji, birds, sketches of roofs, a tree. The lovers walked through the curtains either way. Time shifted like breeze through eye sockets. She. They said goodbye and the Norend curtains opened, and the past was a burning city, seen in silence, just images on screens. Louis, what did Hiroshima mean to you? L. The end of the war, fear and terror that it could happen to us. Then indifference, astonishment that they dared do it. Then it became an unknown fear.
It's so wonderful to hear these words read, Peter, because I've been living with them for a while now. And of course, as a reader, you find a particular rhythm. And when you hear the poet read, you understand that that's the particular cadence with which they have felt the language, right? It's I'm not sure if it differs from reading to reading, but it's a profoundly different experience. And it's also locating it now in a time-based medium, right? It's you've taken with something which is very suggestive to a reader, and you've now fixed it in a space, but we're also hearing it punctuated by your intakes of breath, by your own physical relationship to the texture of the words. So it's really, sometimes I think poetry needs to be heard, but then other times there are poets where I hear them read and it's so disturbingly different from what I had in mind but in your case it's really wonderful. Thank you so much for the reading.
Well, thanks, Adam. And I realize, of course, that you direct voices all the time. You direct voices, and you direct many things when you make films, I know, but you have an ear for voices, and as a director of opera. So I'm just, I'm grateful to hear you comment on hearing the way you do, because I know you have an ear of an unusual kind. So
Well, we
thank you.
also, I mean, we have, I have such a profound relationship to you in terms of how you introduced me to this other world of Gorky, right? You had this, seminal article in Arts in America, and it was really, it shifted something in me, and it really started my relationship to your writing, and of course then reading Black Dog of Fate, and but I found it very crazy tonight, just now, seeing that image, that photograph, and the slow move in, and then
Yeah.
hearing your text over it. I was really moved by that, because that's in some ways the origin of so much of what we were responding to, was this photograph that was taken, and that photograph was taken as a way of transmitting something to
Yes.
someone who had left, right? And we were both kind of absorbed with this idea of a haunted past.
Yes.
It's, that photograph tells of a really haunted past, and then of a almost unimaginably haunted and unresolved past, in terms of what was to happen in the years to come with the genocide and the death of Gorky's mother, and his obsession with this photograph and the two paintings. So there's such a wealth of stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
But this image of him that you create, in the horrors that he was living with during the day, and this image of the turpentine evaporating at night from the floor of the studio is just very stirring, especially over this photograph. I wasn't expecting that, actually. I wasn't expecting.
Well, I was just almost haunted reading with the image, with your image of the photograph, because now you've taken that image, and I mean, you've taken it several times. You do this in Ararat, of course, and you make such an amazingly complex character out of Gorky, and then the character that Arsene plays as the art historian scholar, having just written on Gorky, the intersecting wires of the emanations of this great artist, and that this great artist was an Armenian genocide survivor is, of course, a profound thing. But what's the reason we are wrestling with him, and that he animates us, is because he made such great art out of color and motion, and his amazing draftsmanship, and his the energy, the psychological energy, and the spiritual and psychological energy in Gorky's color is, I don't, it lives on, it just lives. Yes.
Yeah, but now, now it's enhanced and given you meaning through your words, and through this ability you have to create, as you said, these odd, strange intersections, these shifts. And when we're listening to the first poem, I mean, I'm just stunned by your ability to use these cinematic devices of cutting and dissolving, and being able to impose. And for instance, that one session you're talking about with Miles Davis going to do the score for the Louis Malle film, which is an extraordinary. There's a document that exists of that, but that is conjecture, right? The fact that there's this moment where these individuals pass, and these separations that you talk about, but you're orchestrating that when you write a poem. You're creating this incredible world of possibilities, and I'm just fascinated by the craft of that, because when you're talking about Gorky and his use of color, in your case it's this use of word and rhythm and cadence, and how are you constructing that? Is it in my case, there's there's a treatment, there's different versions a draft goes through, there's that whole other thing that happens when you shoot, and you have the energy of the actors, and then you're layering on music and editing, but you're working in such a distilled form, and you are the complete master of that at all times. And it's interesting when I look at the words on the page, there's a strategy to how the words are laid out. There's spacing, there's breaks. How are you crafting that? Because you're an exquisite craftsperson, and can you offer us any glimpse into what goes into constructing these very complex tapestries of time and emotion?
Yeah, well, it is interesting, Adam. The complexity of the world you work in is mind-boggling to a poet. In other words, you have so many materials that you have to organize and master as you do master them and manipulate them. And poetry is a very spare medium. It's language at its most naked, rinsed and boiled, and that's, of course, I think essential to the power of the genre, in that it has these. It is an art in which, as language is boiled and rinsed down, it has to be rinsed down to lines, and lines become the architecture of the music of the language, so that poems, emanate from pulsations, cadences, and clusters of sounds that make the music. And of course, the words are images, the words may be nouns, the words may be conceptual here and there. But yeah, it's about pulsation and rhythm and cadence and phrase. And I do think, the journey, I mean, be interested to hear how it works for a director, but the journey in making a poem is always one of part mystery. There's a part of it. It begins somewhere, and it begins to evolve into places unimagined and that were unpredictable, and then you find yourself, by the strange forces of whatever what all artists deal with, the relationship between the rational and the intuitive. The poem starts evolving, and it starts with an incident that happened, and then, as you say, conjecture and invention. Yes, I know that those characters were in Paris in the late 50s, but I now want to bring them together in my poem, in my own zigzag of intersections. And so there's always a blending of some things that may be factual. But I always want to remind readers that poems are not memoirs, they're not autobiographies, they're inventions, they're fictions, they're imaginings. And like all of us, we hope that our imaginings go deep into what's real.
Well, you've taken on this extraordinary. I mean, you happen to. I gather you're as obsessed with this film as I am. This is Harrison Memoir. So this is. I had to take out my book because you're making direct references to this film, but the film itself is obviously dealing with this intersection of two catastrophes, two
Yes.
and this idea of what one is capable of absorbing or not, right? And it's an affair that probably lasts a day. Like we don't know how this couple meet,
Right.
and then you transpose it. You take that and you use that as a springboard into this other couple, and create this really exquisite dialogue between these two events, and then framed against kind of the global sense of the formation of these cliffs, in terms of how the earth shifted, and then tying that into our space now as we find ourselves in the midst of global change, in terms of political upheaval, in terms of fake news, and it's so ambitious. And how do you structure that? How do you monitor what is accessible to, because as I'm reading it, I go, well, I get that because I know this film really well, and I can go back and read this text, and I can actually layer it up to the dialogue and to these scenes, and but this is what I find so mysterious, I suppose. What frequency are you tuning into? Because in terms of what I do, at some point it has to speak to quite a large audience, right? Films cost a lot of money, and they need you need to raise budgets, but you have this freedom. You can take this anywhere you want, and yet it's so planned. It's so carefully choreographed. How are you? What's the springboard? Is it an actual memory you have of having watched the film at the Angelica that September day? Does it start from the cliffs where you're looking over at Manhattan from New Jersey, or what? Give us some wind.
One thing I enjoy, Adam, about this long poem form, and I was kind of crawling around in long poem forms as a younger poet. And then I wrote this poem in 2000, early 2000s, called A Train Ziggurat Elegy. And it was a 45 section poem. And I felt a great sense of liberation, being able to tell a story through lyric fragmentation. And I felt this excitement about, and this energy from the form that allowed you to bring together disparate threads in a larger story through sequencing, so that you're right, it is choreographed, and it does. I spend, it's my own cutting room, I suppose. I mean, this may have been this was many more sections, and it took a long time to boil it to the 45 sections. But the pacing of the three threads, the idea that you're pacing these three threads over 45 sections allows you to do some jump cutting and moving that I find exciting for the form of the poem. And the longer poem, the kind of wider poem, I use the term horizontal. Writing horizontal is this term I've hitched onto. And the Hiroshima Monomorph film, it's haunted me for so many years, and I've watched it many times. And as I was conceiving of the idea for this couple and their conversation, and these two people having lived through the nuclear age. I mean, right? The nuclear age begins. I mean, I'm born after World War II, and I'm born after 1950, a little bit after 1950. But we who were born in the 50s and on have come into the world in a whole new cosmic and geologic and biochemistry, which is that we are the inhabitants and inheritors of nuclearism. Well, this film is not didactic or polemical in any way. It is simply a brilliant exploration of two lovers who've been tainted by the Hiroshima event and World War II, as you said, the double disasters. And the complexity of René and Duras and how they made art out of that is just it's so exciting. And I did my best to work with it in any way.
Thank you so much for bringing me back into how exciting that film is, because I actually, in reading this, and I don't know if you know, but in the book, there's a lot of, René actually asked Duras to actually write prose about certain scenes that are not in the film, which are included in this collection. And I said, oh my God, that's an incredible collaboration, like where they were working together. And in fact, I came to understand that when she started making films, because she was so unhappy with many of the adaptations of her books, but this one, of course, was a masterpiece. And
it really was.
But
Yeah.
but so is it when you're doing that, are you reading as you're rearranging, are you constantly reading this out loud, or are you just hearing it in your mind?
Reading, when you say reading out loud, do you mean?
Like as you're organizing a long form poem, like and you're trying, you're doing the sequencing, as you said. Are you, is that something that you're reading, or is it just you're hearing it in your mind the whole time?
Well, it's very visual though, because I'm looking at, sometimes I print out all of it, and I'm kind of taping it up on the wall, or I'm putting it out on a big table. I'm looking at the sections, and some of the sections, we all know we have to kill our darlings as artists, and there's sections I love, but my kitchen cabinet of poets, a couple of my dear friends who will read through the draft say, that has to go. And I say, don't tell me, but yeah, of course. So, you're constantly cutting and chopping. And I do read, I do read out loud to myself in my own studio, but there's something very visual and kinetic about the long form poem, because there are numbers, and the numbers are very playful. People, readers don't realize that numbers can really make things happen. So I'm looking at the numbers of the sections and their distances from each other. When did we last encounter the geology? When did we last encounter Mon Amour? When did we last encounter the Vietnam War? And trying to make it work. So, okay, so I see that we're getting a message from Holly here. I don't know, what is that?
Or are there questions? I mean, maybe there's questions.
Is that to us?
We've already run to 45 minutes, and we were told that there are parameters. So maybe we should
Oh, I was just asking people if they had questions to please feel free to share. That's all.
Okay, well, good. We can shift over to that, and I might close out with a poem or two as well. I don't know. What do we want to do? We have questions now, we can take them. If not, I think I'll go back and read a couple of short poems. And then
I love these poems too, because they are very my Armenian grandmother was a wonderful cook, and I hadn't thought about her in the kitchen for a very long time. So a lot of these poems that you're about to read, and they're just exquisite. They're the names of various vegetables, and they're instrumental elements of the Armenian kitchen. And I'd love to hear you read some of these poems.
I'll read a few of these. I call them meditations on fruits and vegetables. They're object lessons. They're kinds of odes. And again, they go places, and readers will take that as they will. This is called Eggplant. I love the white moon circles and the purple halos on a plate as the salt sweat them. The oil in the pan smoked like bad days in the Syrian desert, when a moon stayed all day, when morning was a purple elegy for the last friend seen, when the fog of the riverbank rose like a holy ghost. My mother made those white moons sizzle in some egg wash and salt. Some parsley appeared from the garden, and summer evenings came with no memory, but the table with white dishes, shining aubergine, black-skinned beauty, bitter apple. We used our hands. This is called Bulgur. Why did the chipped grains swirl in butter with onions and then become ghostly when the broth poured? Umber, straw, dust of tufa stones, the mane of Grand's stallion, husk protector, redress to the wind, hard inversion of rain. You came from where the stallion voided over the cliff. You were a stem down by pounding hoofs. When the pot boiled and cooled, the flying steed of Anatolia was steam rising to my face. Ground broth, silk road, goats of dead voices from snow ledge marshes. You grew across the borderless land. Here on the kitchen table, steaming kernels of light shine on plates.
Wow. I mean, only you can kind of bring this kind of, I mean, you have this sense of historic catastrophe, and yet you have the sensuality and the pleasure and joy of cooking. And then you come up with a line like hardened version of rain. Like, where does, like, that's such a beautiful line. And it's exactly, you know, this kernel of hard bulgur, but, you know, hardened version of rain. Like, is that, are there different versions of that, and then that's how it appears, or did that image come to you at that moment?
You know, poems happen in different ways, Adam, and all poems have many drafts, but this was one poem I remember well. It came out in kind of one mysterious kind of unspooling, but I'm sure there were tweaks. But there's something about eating bulgur your whole life, you know, it can do things to your imagination. Now, I want to read this poem, Adam, that also is inspired. This is inspired by a scene in Ararat when Charles Aznavour tells the story of his mother. I think it's his mother,
Yeah.
who on the death march during the Armenian deportations hid a pomegranate under her dress, under her blouse, to help keep her alive. And that was such a searing, it was just one of the intense moment in your great film. That moment, many moments stand out, but that kind of rings bells. This is called Pomegranate. Persephone ate you and went to hell. My grandmother walked with you under her blouse, her two daughters hobbling with her. Every day, one seed for each of them. Whatever death road they walked down, you were seed apple, garnet, cochineal, spiritus ovum, spiraling hawk dive of the soul, leather red skin for hard times. Sometimes she looked up at the moon and saw you.
Again, just the punctuation of that, and the musicality of hearing you read those words is just, it's really quite a revelation, I have to say. I mean, I've read that text. Actually, it was interesting to read that because I was trying to, I'll tell you how complex it gets, because I've read Black Dog of Fate. I was thinking maybe I got that image of the pomegranate and taking one seed and trying to make it into a meal. I was thinking, did I get that from a story you told in Black Dog of Fate? Because for the life of me, I don't know where it came from, but it came from somewhere. And it was so interesting to hear it reverberate in this text. I know that, you know, and we've talked about this one day, you know, your brilliant translation of Siamanto's The Dance, you know, how that poem and your translation is used explicitly in the film, and how we illustrate that, and the layers of how that's been transposed and how these things appear quite mysteriously. But I have to say that it's interesting how I think part of the experience of having a haunted past is that you are trying to locate the origin of things all the time, and you become obsessed about that. And you know, in my film, you know, there's this button, right? There's this gesture of the button that the day that famous photograph that we saw,
yes,
taken,
sure,
you know, there's a very specific gesture he has holding a flower, and my great conjecture maybe is that well, maybe he was actually choreographed to do that by his mother because she was embarrassed that he was missing a button.
Yeah,
And
no, that's a powerful one of those domestic and quotidian images that you dwell on with a lyric intensity, like a lyric poem. I mean, that's a lyric. I mean, you're an amazingly lyric film artist, and that hand with the mother's hand and the thread and the needle and the button is a haunting image that you've taken as a signifier out of the photograph. You've extracted it from that photograph.
but there's something so literal about the film image, and I guess that's what I'm wrestling with all the time. I would like to find a way where I can position these images in the way that you're able to do in a poem, where there is an acknowledged subjectivity, and there's a responsibility that's directly placed in the reader's imagination. And yes, it's true that we may be wrestling with the rhythm of the words because we're not hearing it read, but these explosions that occur, which poetry, great poetry like yours is able to do, it creates these explosions in the mind of the viewer, and you're rocked by that. And like the hardened version of Rain, like those words are designed to refigure our understanding of something we thought we understood. And it's very skillful and very, very precise, very, very moving. And yet it doesn't have that hard, when I create that image of the mother and placing it, there's something I know that people are going to watch and go, oh, that's how it happened. They're not going to think that it's an act of imagination.
Well, I mean, Adam, this kind of leads to a big philosophical discussion about the epistemology of the visual image, in a way, and the epistemology of words in tiny phrases and lines on a page. I mean, they do their things differently, and I appreciate hearing you talk about your own encounter with some of those images in some of these poems, the pomegranate poem, the Bulgar poem. I'm delighted and honored to hear you, that they reach you that way. At the same time, the screenic image has got such a dynamic explosivity, and it's a whole interesting conversation about film and poetry. And I think there on the Venn diagram, the overlap here is interesting too. It's a good seminar that we should do sometime.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if anybody in the chat session has any questions as we're chugging on with time. Holly, anybody there with questions?
Yeah, so we have someone here who's said thank you very much for your thoughts and the conversation this evening. And they're asking, since I think I can fairly say that both of you are interested and invested in memoir and the complications of narratives of memory, I was wondering how either of you felt towards the newish, and I'm making the air quotes there, trend towards autofiction, the very popular genre that combines elements of autobiography and fiction. Do either one of you have thoughts on that?
Well, I love, like Rachel Cusk. I think her the Transit, the trilogy, it's such an exquisite feat. If that's what we're talking about, right? I think those are the type of writers we're talking about. And I don't know if Knausgaard is out of fiction.
I would say yes.
So those are two writers. I think those are kind of the male and female versions of that. I don't consider it to be that new. I mean, there's always been that, there have been writers who have actually a completely forgotten figure, but is Armenian, is Arthur Adamov, right? And so he came into the Paris scene in the 1920s with an amazing piece of autofiction. which also inspired Beckett. You know, a lot of Beckett's writings are also autofiction. But I love it as I get, and Ben Lerner, I guess, as Ben Lerner's autofiction, you know, a writer I admire greatly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with you, Adam. I'm not sure it's that new either. I think that you know, it's being framed in a certain way in newer work, and yeah, the writers you mentioned are, you know, Rachel Cusk is and Ben Lerner both are kind of wizards at the synthesis of the auto with the fiction.
And the use, and you know, I mean, I just find that there's a, yeah, I mean, I you know, when we're talking about Armenian writers, I would think that William Saroyan is kind of the master of autofiction. I mean, that he, you know, that's basically what he did all the time, right? And so I don't think it's new. I think there's actually a particular tradition of it. And
Right.
I mean, how do you separate? I mean, curious, where is Black Dog of Fate not an autofiction?
Well, I mean, it's a memoir, so it has no identity. It's fiction in terms of genre. But any memoirist has to walk the line between the assurance that the factual presentations are legitimate. I mean, if I'm making up anything, it's wrong. I can't make up, you know, my grandmother has to have been a death march survivor into the Syrian desert in 1915. I can't make that up.
This is very interesting.
But once I get her in the Syrian desert, I have to make up some of the scene. I mean, you know, the memoir writer has to create settings, dialogues, clothing. You know, you have to create things because it's a convention that's understood. The reader knows that you can't falsify your grandmother's death march survivor event, but you also have to probe it with imagination. So I think that convention works. I think the hybridization of the two concepts also is alive in memoir writing. Now, I've never done fiction writing, but I've done memoir writing.
But I think of a writer I greatly admire as well, is Thomas Bernhardt. So again, Thomas Bernhardt was probably doing autofiction, right? Because he's writing about his parents, but you realize that at a certain point, this can't be real, right? Or that there are departures that are being made. But that's interesting what you're saying about, because when I think of Black Dog of Fate, like, and we've talked about this before, like where it becomes, anyway, it's a longer subject matter.
Yeah, sure.
I see we're sort of running out of time.
Are there other? There are a lot of autofiction fiction. I'm just reading Jack Kerouac's Dharma Bums this week, and it's autofiction, and we could talk about how and why that works. Holly, how? Oh, good.
I just want to say thank you both very much for being here this evening, for having this conversation with us. Peter,
Thank
again,
you.
thank you for your readings of your poems. It was wonderful. Adam, it was so nice to have you here with us this evening in conversation. We've posted links to the video, so please, I hope everyone will go to YouTube and have a look. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece. The music will stir you amazingly. So
Holly, before you leave, I want to say one thing too.
Of course.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I have one thing to say, and that is, and I know this, you know, this is part of a book launch, so I hope viewers will be interested in buying No Sign, but I want to urge viewers to buy No Sign from Elliott Bay Book Company, because it is truly one of the great bookstores and book cultures in the USA. It's a landmark. And so please, audience, if you know, buy from Elliott Bay, don't just buy my book, buy books from Elliott Bay.
Thank you.
They're the greatest.
And if I could just say, that exquisite music is by Mary Kuyumjan, who's a brilliant young
It's gorgeous.
Armenian American composer. So this was so yes, I urge people to go and look at. It's called "They Will Take My Island," and it's on YouTube, the Met site.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Thank you. Thank you for your kind words about Elliott Bay. Thank you. It means the world. Thank you.
Thank you
very
guys.
much.
Again, thank you all. Thank you.
Good night.
All right. Good
Okay.
night. Thank
Night
you.
all. Thanks again. And thanks. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Peter.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.